Okay, we are going to get started. I think we'll have more people joining us in a little bit. Come on in. Welcome. So my name is Amy Holm, and good morning. Welcome to the USA Climate Pavilion, hosted by the Climate Registry. The Climate Registry is a nonprofit organization that helps both public and private sector organizations to measure, report, and disclose their carbon emissions. And when we're not doing carbon accounting, we are supporting U.S. states to attend the COP, and we've been doing that since 2007. And we're happy to have a number of the states represented here to talk about how U.S. states are moving forward on climate action in spite of what is happening at the federal level. So today's panelists are going to talk about strategies that reduce emissions while creating jobs, supporting communities, and laying the groundwork for a fair and sustainable net zero future. And right now I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's session, Trig Talley. It's my great pleasure to introduce Trig. He has served as a senior career official in the U.S. Department of State that focused on responding to climate change for over 2 decades. And I have met a number of the young people that you've mentored in your long and very well-established career who have gone on to do great things and carry on your good work. He is well known for serving as a U.S. head of delegation to the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement official negotiations 2013-2014. He also oversaw a broad range of State Department programs on clean energy, sustainable land use, and adaptation. Trig, over to you.
Well, thank you, everybody. I've been told I should speak deeply into the microphone, so hopefully you can hear me. Well, I'm very excited to be here. I am now moving from the federal level to the sub-federal level. I will be a professor at the University of Maryland. And Maryland, of course, is one of the great climate states working on climate. And I am here as well representing the group America is All In. And I'll say a quick word about that. America is All In is a kind of umbrella for all of the coalitions in the United States that are committed to the climate cause. So today you will hear from the states, from representatives of states, and the Climate Alliance is a key partner for us. We have 24 states. We also work with the climate mayors, which represent hundreds of cities and municipalities around the country. And we also represent coalitions, faith-based organizations, many hundreds of institutions that are part of our coalition. Universities, we have several hundred universities that are part of our coalition, as well as tribes, hospitals, and many others. And it is a very broad coalition that actually represents 75% of the U.S. economy. That's about the size of China on a market exchange rate basis. So we are still, as America, a very large entity. It's 2/3 of America's population and 50% of our emissions. Together, since 2005, the states and municipalities have managed to reduce their emissions by about 24%, while growing their economy by 38%. It's very impressive. And they're on track to reduce more over the next decade. And in fact, the University of Maryland has some data that suggests that without any additional action, we will be at 35% below 2005 levels by 2035, and that is largely thanks to subnational action. And with more action, we can actually come relatively close to the NDC that the Biden administration put forward, which I know remains a true north for many of our coalition partners. So that's a word on the U.S. states, and I'm very pleased that we have such a strong set of panelists this morning. They are the second contingent of subnational leaders who've been here. We had over 100 subnational leaders come to Rio, And so this group kind of came in and has taken the second duty, and we really appreciate that. I wish that everyone here could have seen the really large contingent of subnational leaders who came to Rio, because they claim that they were the largest delegation, including Brazil, who was here. And that just shows the level of commitment and the breadth of commitment across the United States for this agenda. But let me just, why don't we have the panelists come up, and we're going to have Sarah speak. Well, we'll have Sarah speak first, and then we'll have the panelists come up. But it's especially pleased to have Sarah Swig here, who is the Deputy Cabinet Secretary and Senior Advisor for Climate for Governor Newsom, who is America is All In's chairperson. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, it's really exciting to be here to open up this panel today, because this is such an important topic and one that California has been speaking about really throughout the last few weeks in Brazil and through this whole term. So, as discussed last December, the United States submitted its NDC, but I think what's really important is the role that states and subnationals are going to play in helping to meet those NDCs. Governor Newsom co-chaired the Local Leaders Forum in Rio last week, where over 14,000 cities, states, and other subnationals came together to share a message ahead of the meeting at the COP to say that we, your subnational cities, regions, states, are here to co-deliver your NDCs and your national adaptation plans, and that is really important as we face these really difficult headwinds, of course, in Washington, D.C. We've seen great leadership over the last 4 years, and now we're facing really serious headwinds, so it's really important for these kinds of convenings so we can share all of the really important work that our states and regions are doing. Governor Newsom was here in Brazil last week to share the message that California remains your stable, reliable partner in the fight in climate change, and along with all of our coalitions, including the US Climate Alliance, which, as we just heard about, is a coalition of 24 bipartisan governors committed to reaching the Paris Climate Agreement. We have the Pacific Coast Collaborative, which links California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia to accelerate clean transportation, grid decarbonization, and climate resilience. We also, in California, our Cap and Invest program is linked with Quebec, which is, the largest carbon market and most successful over the past decade. And then, of course, which Governor Newsom also co-chairs, the America's All-In Coalition, which is the largest coalition committed to reaching Paris. But I think what's also really important is that our subnational partnerships are not just local, they're not just specific to the state. Under Governor Newsom's leadership, he's really built on the leadership of prior governors to advance international agreements. Really, in the wake of the absence of federal leadership, we're seeing a real hunger from our international partners to work with California, to work with other states, and we've been really proud to sign agreements, memorandums of understanding, joint statements with partner countries like Brazil, including the state of Pará, Chile, the Netherlands, China, both at the provincial and the national level. And, we get a lot of questions about what are these MOUs? Are they just pieces of paper that people sign? But I think it's really important to note that these are real two-way interactions, communications, shared learnings. In our meeting, in the governor's meeting with Chile, we were sharing data from our methane satellite and sharing those learnings with Chile, and Chile was sharing their experiences with us, and our partnerships with other countries. They're really eager to hear about our carbon markets, our Cap and Invest, and our work on the EV transition, and we're able to share, how our strong mandates paired with investment and this stable market has really led to such success in California. So just have a couple closing statements. A key message for California is that climate action is actually leading to economic success. We've become the fourth largest economy in the world while at the same time reducing carbon pollution. So we're showing that you can create jobs, drive innovation, and I think we'll hear similar stories from Tennessee and in New Mexico on clean manufacturing, energy innovation, and the success that's happening at those state levels. So, today's panel is all about that subnational leadership. Excited to have our California Agriculture Secretary to share the perspective as well on food systems and the role the agriculture and healthy foods can play in climate. So with that, I'll turn it over to our back to Trig for our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm sure I speak for everybody to say how important and exciting it was to have Governor Newsom here. I can't tell you how many people have talked about that with us, so it was quite a moment in this COP. Maybe the most inspiring one that we've had. So with that, come on up. Let me quickly introduce our distinguished panelists. And if you would just come. So first is Travis Kellerman from the great state of New Mexico, the Senior Policy Advisor for Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources. And then we have Alexa Wojtek, who is the Deputy Director of the Office of Energy Programs from Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. Really delighted to have you here. My mother is from Tennessee, so that's... And then Karen Ross, so happy to have you here, Secretary of California Department of Food and Agriculture. So I will ask you one question for each of you to answer, and then I'll ask each of you a question. And please speak directly into the mic like this. The question is, what key priorities, sectors, and strategies are you focusing on to make progress in your jurisdiction's decarbonization goals? And how do you see that in relation to the U.S. nationally determined contribution?
Okay. Is the mic working? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Travis.
Thank you for the introduction. It's good to be here. This is only my second COP, but it's a lot different than last year in Azerbaijan. First of all, a lot of people, especially over the last year, starting in Azerbaijan, talked about how can the U.S. possibly have any impact or effective leadership in climate change and climate action and decarbonization when the new administration is so vehemently anti-climate action and doesn't really care about decarbonization. And really, as we've heard, these different organizations that pull together states within the United States to continue their leadership on climate action is what matters. There's also a view of where we can not necessarily work together, but find spaces where we can have the most impact in light of what's happening at our federal level. So for New Mexico, there's a few spaces that are really key. New Mexico is the second biggest oil producer in the U.S. We've now moved up to become the third biggest gas producer. So if you think about oil and gas energy supply chains, that is one of the biggest opportunities for decarbonization around the world. With New Mexico and with the U.S. increasingly exporting what they produce, New Mexico, with its small population, relatively small economy, now has a very outsized role and impact on the rest of the world in decarbonizing and certifying the decarbonization of our oil and gas supply chains. So to that end, we have a few things at play. First of all, our methane waste rule is nation leading. Before this recent federal administration, our rule was adopted by the EPA for how to control methane, methane intensity, methane leakage, all the things that make producing gas really harmful to the environment. Methane is anywhere between 20 to over 100 times as damaging to our atmosphere as carbon alone, and has a global warming potential equivalent to that. So the more we control and reduce methane leakage, the more we control that damage. Our methane waste rule has been extremely successful, and it is a regulation that our oil and gas industry complies with to a great extent. We do have to lock down the data around that, but so far we've seen a 71% reduction over our 2005 baseline. And as we continue to ramp up our oil and gas production, knocking down those methane emissions, that leakage rate, is really key to claiming and certifying that we have the cleanest barrel of oil, the cleanest MCF of gas in the world. The other piece, to continue that work and also look at things like associated CO2, look at our midstream, how do we control emissions there, is our certified gas program. So this is a voluntary market-driven framework that gives incentives and rewards for producers to voluntarily certify their volumes, that they are, yes, low methane intensity, that they've taken all the steps necessary to control leakage on their sites in their production as much as possible. And if they certify, if they qualify, now we start to see the opening up of premiums and premium access to new markets around the world. One of those is with the country of Japan. And I see our Japanese friends here today. My governor has done a lot of work to build that relationship and that trade agreement to use New Mexico's certified gas for gas to power and electricity production in the country of Japan. We see a lot of movement there for premiums in that market. And now we're looking at the EU and their methane intensity requirements to also build those trade relationships. If we do it right, New Mexico can set a model around the world for low carbon, low methane intensity gas, and also oil as we expand this program that really affects global supply chains, has a very much an outsized impact compared to how big New Mexico is. The other piece I just want to mention before I hand it over is another area of bipartisan agreement, geothermal. And New Mexico now is ranked #1 for our geothermal potential, #1 in the US. Geothermal involves essentially drilling into the ground to access either hydrothermic reserves where you actually see steam coming out of the ground, or there's a rift you can drill into, or enhanced or advanced geothermal, which really focuses on deeper drilling for hot rocks. This is clean, firm power. And that's really critical because if we want to power the new data centers that are coming into New Mexico, we have to have new sources of firm power. And ideally, we would have clean, firm power under our Energy Transition Act. Geothermal, we have oil and gas drilling workforce that can easily relearn and upgrade their skills in about 6 months to become either engineers, on-site technicians, drilling workforce, the equivalent of a roughneck on a geothermal site. And we can produce clean, firm power for our data center infrastructure, which is set to triple our load by 2032 alone. So right now we only use about 2.7 gigawatts. We'll be at close to 7 or 8 gigawatts in the early 2030s. If we don't have geothermal, we don't have increased solar and storage and wind, we're not going to meet that unless we try to build out a lot of gas power. And as I mentioned, we have certified gas to power that as well.
Thanks, Travis.
Thank you. So thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. As was said, I'm with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, or as we like to say, Tennessee's Quality of Life Department. In Tennessee, we are actually the only state in the U.S. that's blanketed both by public power as well as by a single generation and transmission utility, and that utility is the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, which was created back in 1933 by FDR under the New Deal. And TVA was mandated back then to bring electricity to what was then a very economically depressed part of the country, the Tennessee Valley, which covers parts of 7 states, but blankets the state of Tennessee. And so TVA is well known for doing that by bringing hydropower dams to the state of Tennessee and to the valley to bring that electricity. As of today, our power is nearly 60% carbon free, and that's because of the work that TVA has done with hydro, but also on the nuclear front. And so TVA has really led with nuclear and continues to lean in on the nuclear side. So a lot of the work that we're doing now is focused on advanced nuclear and deploying new nuclear to help further decarbonize the electricity generation sector. So TVA back in 2019 was the first utility in the US to receive an early site permit from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to deploy a small modular reactor at their Clinch River site. As of actually last week, we received preliminary approval from the NRC on the construction permit. And so that has kickstarted the environmental impact statement process, and we hope to receive that permit by next year. In addition to the SMRs that TVA plans to deploy at their Clinch River site, which is a GE Hitachi boiling water reactor, they've also this year just signed the first ever nuclear power purchase agreement for a Generation 4 reactor with Kairos Power. That's for a 50 megawatt molten salt reactor in collaboration with Google. And then TVA also signed a power purchase agreement with Enter One Energy to purchase up to 6 gigawatts of nuclear power using NuScale's SMR technology. So TVA is moving in on multiple fronts on the nuclear side. From the state perspective, we're trying to be a supportive partner to build that nuclear ecosystem and the nuclear workforce. Tennessee is already home to 230 nuclear companies, but back in 2023, our governor created the Nuclear Supply Chain Investment Fund, and so we've put $70 million towards attracting nuclear businesses to the state to deploy additional research and deployment. Even though $70 million doesn't seem like a lot in the nuclear industry where projects can cost a lot of money, I think just creating that fund has sent a message, and it seems like a week does not go by where a new nuclear company is announcing that they're coming to Tennessee. And so just a few examples, Orano will be building the nation's largest enrichment facility in Oak Ridge. Oklo just announced this year that they'll be building a nuclear fuel recycling facility in Tennessee. Radiant announced just a couple months ago that they're building micro reactors to replace diesel generators, and so they'll be manufacturing those micro reactors in Tennessee. And then another example is Type 1 Energy, which is a fusion technology company that is receiving support from the fund and that we are working with to deploy a fusion demonstration pilot in coordination with both TVA and Oak Ridge National Laboratory. The state of Tennessee has also been working to develop the nation's first regulatory framework for fusion power. So we are an agreement state with the NRC, so we have the authority to regulate fusion, and so we've just developed those rules. Those were released just a few months ago and are now under public review and comment. And so we're hoping to, by developing that framework, quicken the deployment of fusion deployment within the state. I'll switch just briefly to the topic of transportation electrification, and so that's another area of focus for our state. That's partly because TVA, as our primary generation and transmission utility, they are self-regulated, and so they're regulated by their board, which is appointed by the US president. So we at the state, we don't have a public utility commission that regulates them like many states do. And so because we can't dictate certain things with TVA on their generation mix or on how much they're investing in energy efficiency, we see certain areas of opportunity such as transportation electrification as more of a collaborative way in which we can engage with TVA to deploy EVs across the state. And so we've been working with them. We co-funded what we call the Fast Charge TN network, where we deployed fast chargers across all of our interstates and US highways throughout the state, starting back in 2021. And that was to really unlock areas of the state, particularly rural parts of the state, where we did not see the private sector investing in the near term because the utilization was expected to be low, but we wanted to build that minimum viable backbone of charging infrastructure. We've also been working with TVA on a freight electrification strategy and trying to dig deeper into the medium and heavy duty space, the non-road space, and thinking through ways in which we can reduce market barriers to adoption there. A couple other things I'll just quickly mention before I pass it. We also work on the transportation side very closely with many of our university partners, trying to deploy more innovative technologies or solutions in the marketplace to demonstrate their viability. So an example, we're working with Tennessee Tech and Nissan on the deployment of used electric vehicle batteries that have lived their useful life, giving them a second life deployment as stationary storage for charging infrastructure in rural communities where it may be cost prohibitive to upgrade the grid to build charging infrastructure. And then we're also thinking about the transportation sector as a system. And so we're working on a project with Oak Ridge National Laboratory in the city of Nashville to deploy sensors across the system, understand what's causing traffic congestion, and then use AI optimized traffic signal control with the goal of reducing congestion by 20%, thinking of it as an energy efficient mobility system. And so those are just some examples of what we're doing in Tennessee.
I'm all about reducing traffic congestion. That sounds great. Even in the Central Valley, which is the most productive ag region in the world, congestion's an issue, especially with all the trucks. So thank you for that. Yes, I am here from the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and I'm very excited to share some of the examples of what we're doing in very different ways from the really exciting work that we've heard here. But obviously, the state policies that Sarah introduced are very impactful for California as well. And I'm really proud that California was one of the first states where agriculture stepped up to be at the table, to also be part of the solution, which is one of the exciting things I love to talk about. I think it's really important when we think about what we're doing on climate, that we think about what this changing climate means for food production and food security and nutrition security. And that's why it's so important for agriculture to be a part of these kinds of discussions, and to think about the ways in which we use energy, and to think about the ways we grow food, and to think about the ways we can be part of the solution by drawing down carbon and storing it in our soils. So I'm going to touch on a few programs in particular that are very important for me, that are part of our goals. One of our mandates, and it was legislation that was passed in 2013, is a 40% reduction in methane emissions from livestock specifically. We are the only state, or the only country that I know of, that has that in state statute. And we have been successful in being able to do this because of going back to how California, when we set our very ambitious goals for climate, did it under what was then called cap and trade, now cap and invest model, where capped sectors of the industry, which includes a lot of our largest food processors as an example, can either invest in the technology to lower their emissions or buy credits in our carbon market, which so far has been extremely successful. It's generated hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars, which the state has been very intentional about reinvesting and making sure that we're capable of transitioning all of our business sectors and society to carbon neutrality by 2045. Very, very important, because those dollars have generated the funds that we've been able to offer for voluntary practices, incentive grants, to prove on the ground we're taking the risk out of making this transition with how we farm. And dairy digesters for energy production and renewable energy production have been the very successful practice for us to be able to meet that 40% reduction in our methane emissions by 2030 based on 2013 levels. I stress those because I get kind of panicky. I was around in 2013, I won't be around in 2030, but man, that's coming up fast. But because of digesters and the offtake of that renewable energy, in particular because of another very important policy that's part of our climate goals, is the low carbon fuel standard for transportation, that has really made it economically viable. Farmers on the dairies are partnering with developers who know how to make these things work and have been able to go to the private markets to raise $550 million to match the $300 million the state is investing to make these successful long-term projects. Our next goal is to get all of the trucks that come to every farm for dairy milk and feed every day to also be using that renewable natural gas kind of energy use. So that's been very important, but we also match that with alternative manure management projects like composting, like separating solids from the liquids and being able to use that in place of synthetic fertilizer, which is very important for emissions as well. And it's important because California produces 20% of the United States milk in the country. We're the #1 milk producer, in addition to being the #1 producer of all agricultural products, including many of our specialty products. So having agriculture at the table to understand how they can be part of the solution, but also we are on the tip of the spear of how that food production will be impacted. Our very first climate program was an on-farm water use efficiency and water efficiency program that lowers energy use, which is one of the major cost drivers for much of our irrigated agriculture. They lowered energy, which lowered their greenhouse gas emissions. and it improved their nitrogen cycling and the use of nitrogen in such an efficient way that it's really also helping in that particular environmental solution for what we're looking for. The other thing I really wanted to touch on, and I wish my colleague from the tribal office could be here to talk about all the ways that 3030 is so important to what we're doing. One of the goals that we set in our update of our scoping plan was for nature-based solutions, natural working lands. How do we manage our open lands? How do we conserve more of that land? And how do we improve the water quality by conserving more of our marine waters, as well as our commitment to biodiversity? The agricultural piece of that is important to me because 30% of the world's biodiversity is below ground. And how we manage our soils and how we feed our soils, so all those microorganisms and that ecosystem below ground, improves productivity, it increases water holding capacity, it improves nutrient cycling, and it ensures that we'll be able to grow food for the long term. We've also been able to conserve farmland through the Strategic Growth Council, called our Sustainable Ag Land Conservation Program, because we've quantified what the conversion of ag land to more intense urban development means for emissions, and if we're able to conserve the most productive farmland, we're also part of sequestering in addition to avoiding its avoided emissions. So we've been very creative in how we've been able to do that. I could talk, as you can see, forever about all of the rest of the programs that we're doing, but I'll wait and make that part of the rest of our conversation. But I really wanted to highlight our Healthy Soils program, our water use efficiency program, and our methane reduction program as ways in which we are definitely at the table. Policy and investment have come with that to make it work for us.
Well, thank you. It's so exciting to hear people working on the front lines in areas where they're like forging ahead and leading on issues. And so I congratulate you all, and it's very exciting. Methane was a big preoccupation for John Kerry and John Podesta here, and we've pushed very hard for all countries to engage very strongly on methane because, as you say, it's the strongest. It's actually the best way for us to impact temperatures in the shortest amount of time. So I wonder if I could just have you all elaborate a little bit on areas where you see that your state is leading. And in particular, how are you engaging with other states, and what lessons do you bring to your area? I mean, I know, for example, New Mexico is a great leader in trying to develop its energy resources sustainably, and I'm sure there's a lot that you now have to impart to other states and other countries about the lessons you're learning. And similarly, on nuclear, I think, and transport, Tennessee is really forging ahead, and there's such interest now in small modular reactors and other forms of nuclear power. It'd be interesting to know how do you see, and also how do you see the time frame for deployment? Will that speed up because of our need for capacity and our focus on the technology? What's the time frame? And then, of course, all of the things that you are doing to make sure that agriculture is sustainable. It's a very complicated grassroots type of constituency that you deal with, and I'm very curious how you are, the things that you've learned as you've worked through this with your constituents. What kinds of arguments are the most effective when you are working with them to bring all your stakeholders on board? So that's a lot of questions, but we have about 25 minutes, so please feel free to expand on these. Thanks.
Well, I'll try to pull all of that together. On the last